the man who remembered tomorrow. Marcus Hale had always been precise, not careful, precise. There is a difference, and the difference matters the way a surgical incision differs from a wound. One is deliberate, the other is simply what happens when something sharp meets something that was never meant to hold together. He kept 3 analog clocks in his apartment, each set to a different time zone, because he traveled for work and hated the disorientation of jet lag. He tracked his sleep in 15-minute intervals. He logged what he ate, what he dreamed, what the weather was doing at exactly the moment he woke. He was, in every measurable sense, a man who knew where he was in time. Which is why, on a Tuesday in November, when he walked into the office kitchen and found himself remembering a conversation that hadn't happened yet, he didn't panic. He catalogued it. He reached for the counter to steady himself, felt the cold laminate under his fingertips and thought, "This is new information. This is something to be understood." The conversation happened 4 hours later, word for word, down to the pause where Daniel from accounting cleared his throat twice before saying the name of the client they were about to lose. Marcus told himself it was pattern recognition. The brain, he knew, was a prediction engine. It synthesized behavioral data, micro-expressions, tonal shifts, the particular way Daniel's left shoulder dropped when he was delivering bad news, and rendered those predictions as memory. It was a known phenomenon. There was probably a paper on it. He would find the paper. He did not find the paper. What he found, 3 nights later, was another memory that hadn't happened yet. This one was longer, more detailed. He was standing in the elevator of his building, and a woman he didn't recognize was crying, not weeping, but that specific, controlled crying that people do when they're trying not to, when the body is insisting on grief that the mind has declared inconvenient. She was wearing a yellow coat. She had a small cut above her left eyebrow, recently sealed but not quite healed, and she looked at him with an expression he couldn't name. Not fear, not recognition, something with the texture of both. He saw her the next morning. Yellow coat. The cut, precisely where he'd placed it. He stepped into the elevator and the doors closed, and she looked at him, and the expression arrived exactly as he'd stored it. And his throat did something involuntary, something he recorded later as constriction, not pain, approximately 4 seconds. He didn't speak to her. He understood with a certainty that frightened him more than the memory had, that speaking to her would be wrong, that some part of the sequence required him to remain still. The episodes accelerated. He began keeping a second journal, separate from the first, written in a shorthand he invented on the spot and changed daily. He did not want his therapist to find it. He was not yet sure he would keep seeing his therapist, because his therapist had a habit of offering explanations, and Marcus was becoming increasingly certain that explanations, in this case, were a form of violence against the truth. The memories were not dreams. He needed to be absolutely clear about this to himself. In the shorthand journal, underlined, they were not dreams. Dreams had the quality of smoke. They shifted, they lost coherence when examined, they betrayed themselves under pressure. These were the opposite. They hardened when he looked at them. They became more specific, not less. The smell of rain on a particular Tuesday. The sound a specific traffic light made at 11:47 p.m. on a street he had never been to. A sound he could not have invented because it turned out the light was malfunctioning, had been malfunctioning for a week, and made a sound that no functioning traffic light would ever make. He began to understand that he was not predicting the future. Prediction implies uncertainty, probability, the possibility of error, what Marcus was doing, what was happening to Marcus, was remembering. His memory simply included events that his present self had not yet experienced. The distinction felt important. The distinction felt, in fact, like the most important thing he had ever thought, and also like the edge of something he was not equipped to look over. Because if memory was not constrained by chronology, if his mind was filing experiences from both directions simultaneously, then Marcus Hale had never had a choice about anything. Not one. Not ever. He tested this. He would remember something. The specific lunch he would eat on Thursday, a turkey sandwich on rye with too much mustard from the deli 2 blocks north. And then he would go to a different deli, a different direction, and order something else entirely. He sat down with a chicken salad wrap. He ate it. He logged it. He went home and wrote, "Deviated." Then he lay awake for 6 hours, and in the morning, with a calm that was indistinguishable from terror, wrote one more word beneath it. Didn't. He had ordered the chicken salad wrap. He was certain of this. The receipt was in his coat pocket. The slight vinegary aftertaste was still somewhere at the back of his tongue. And yet the memory from 3 days prior had shown him eating a turkey sandwich on rye, and what he was now remembering from 3 days prior, with the same crystalline, unfalsifiable certainty, was eating a chicken salad wrap. The memory had changed. The future he hadn't lived yet had changed to match what he'd done. He sat with this for a very long time. He made tea, which he didn't drink. He stood at his window and watched the street below, where a man walked a large gray-muzzled dog with the patience of someone who had long since made peace with slowness. He thought about the word reality and what it required. It required consistency. It required the agreement of before and after, of memory and event, of the world you expected and the world you found. And he thought, I have been assuming that my memories of the future are like a forecast, fixed, waiting for me to arrive at them. But they weren't forecasts. They were something closer to a mirror, and a mirror reflects what stands in front of it. Which meant the future was not waiting for him. It was watching him. It was adjusting. He stopped sleeping, not from agitation. He was, if anything, preternaturally calm, the calm of a diver who has gone deep enough that the water above is now indistinguishable from the water below. He stopped sleeping because in the space between waking and sleep, the memories of unspent time arrived in volumes he could not process. A torrent of mundane and terrible futures stacked atop each other, each one equally vivid, each one equally certain, and he could not determine whether they were parallel or sequential, or whether that distinction meant anything anymore. He called in sick for 3 days, then stopped calling. He had a memory of returning to work on a Thursday in late December, so he knew he would. This did not comfort him. He visited the yellow-coat woman again in his memory. She had a name now in the future past, a name he had learned in an elevator conversation that he now remembered having in both directions simultaneously, remembered learning her name, and remembered already knowing it, and the two memories were identical in every detail, except the one that should have differentiated them, and that detail was gone, smoothed over, as if whatever was doing this had decided the distinction was no longer useful. He found the paper, eventually, not the one he'd been looking for, a different paper, in a journal he'd never read, by a researcher at a university whose name he had to look up. The paper was about a condition documented in 3 patients following specific neurological events: a stroke, a tumor, a brief clinical death. In all three cases, the patients described experiencing memory from non-sequential time. In all three cases, the condition had resolved within 6 months. In all three cases, the resolution was the same. The patients stopped being able to distinguish between things that had happened and things that hadn't. They became, in the paper's careful clinical language, temporally non-specific. They could function. They held jobs, maintained relationships, navigated traffic. They simply could not, when asked, reliably identify whether a given memory belonged to their past or their future, or whether that question made sense. Marcus read this 3 times. He thought about the 3 clocks on his wall, each set to a different time zone, each telling a different story about when it was. He had always found this clarifying. Now he found it funny, in a way that had nothing to do with humor. He took the clocks down. Not because the time was wrong, because the time was right, all 3 of them, right for somewhere, right for some version of now, and he was beginning to understand that he lived in all of those nows simultaneously, had always been living in all of them, had simply lacked the awareness to notice. The awareness, he thought, was not a gift, but it was undeniably a thing that was happening to him. He put the clocks in a box in the closet. He made tea again. This time, he drank it. He sat at his kitchen table in the November dark and let the memories arrive from both directions without trying to sort them, feeling them settle into place the way sediment settles, not organized, not chronological, simply at rest. He thought about the woman in the yellow coat. He thought about the conversation in the elevator he had already remembered from both ends. He thought about the fact that at some point, he could feel it coming from one direction and receding from the other. He would understand, completely and without remainder, what had happened to him. And he thought about the paper's final line, which he had read 3 times and now could not stop hearing. In each case, the patient reported feeling, above all, calm. He was calm. He was extraordinarily, irrevocably calm. Outside his window, the city moved in its layered, simultaneous way. People going to places they hadn't been yet, coming from places that would stay with them. Every movement both first and last, every moment both arriving and already gone. He watched it for a long time, or for no time at all. The tea went cold. He didn't notice. He was already remembering this moment from the other side, and it looked exactly the same. A man at a table, a dark window, a cold cup, and the strange, terrible peace of a mind that has run out of the right questions to ask. If you've made it this far, stay just a little longer. Storytime. Scary Dark is built for listeners who want horror that lives under the skin, not just behind the eyes. And there are 26 other episodes waiting in the dark for you. Subscribe, so the next story finds you before you go looking for it. And if this one stayed with you, if you're already wondering whether you've heard it before, leave a like and let us know what you remember.